Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey. In this lecture, we're going to talk about a bunch of design patterns. Okay, so first of all, what are design patterns? In the last lecture, we already covered one specific design pattern, the singleton. These are basically some general, reusable solutions to some common programming problems. The Wikipedia page has a great reference with tons and tons of detail. For example, the singleton pattern that we just saw. This one is a nice solution for the problem of how do you ensure a class has only one instance, and how do you ensure that it has a global point that is easily accessible. That's the entire purpose behind that pattern. And by writing the code like we saw in the previous lecture, that is how we can achieve those rules. So that is a very good solution to that common problem. And within that pattern, we also saw another mini pattern, the lazy initialization. So this is how we made sure that the singleton only gets created the first time that it's actually needed. Another pattern we've actually already seen is the observer pattern. This is a pattern where an observer interacts with a subject to be notified whenever something happens. So yep, this is literally what we already covered in the events lecture. A class subscribes to an event and again gets notified when that event is fired. So using events is essentially the observer pattern. Another common one is the command pattern. With this one, you can basically create commands that can be executed later on. So one common use case for this kind of pattern is making some kind of undo system. So when you do some kind of action, you create a command for the undo action with all the data that is needed to perform that undo. And then when you want to undo, it simply runs that command. So this is the kind of thing that can easily be built by combining a stack with delegates. Another interesting one is the factory pattern. With this one, you basically put the creation of an object in some kind of factory class, and then instead of having every class with a constructor that anyone can call, instead only that factory class is responsible for creating those objects. Again, we also saw a part of that pattern in the singleton pattern, where the singleton itself is responsible for creating the object. So the factory pattern is pretty much just a more dedicated part of this pattern. It can be really useful to limit the number of places from which a certain type of object can be created. Then the object pool pattern, this is a really useful one. This is how you can create a pool of a bunch of objects, and in doing so it really reduces the impact for creating and destroying objects. Unity actually recently introduced an object pool type that does exactly that. If you have performance issues with spawning and destroying objects, you should definitely be using some kind of pooling. Then dependency injection. This is an excellent pattern for testing your programs. This one uses interfaces quite heavily. It's one of the main reasons why interfaces are really excellent. You can inject different types of objects as long as they implement a common interface. Then the adapter pattern, or simply a wrapper. This is especially great when working with some kind of third-party code. You build a wrapper that only contains the info you care about, and then you don't have to worry about any more of the underlying implementation. So as you can see over here, there are tons and tons of patterns, and pretty much all of these have dedicated pages, so if you want to dig deeper, I definitely encourage you to do so. These patterns were created by some very smart people in order to solve some very common problem. So rather than reinventing the wheel, just being familiar with some of these is really great. But you really don't need to memorize all of these. I highly encourage you to research them just so you know they exist. But don't try to memorize everything in one go. Like with the Visual Studio Shortcuts lecture, this is something that you pick up more and more over time. But definitely do take the time to research these in a little bit more. Like the saying goes, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. Sometimes you have a problem for which a pattern would be the perfect solution, and if you know that pattern, then you can simply apply it rather than having to reinvent a brand new solution. Now for me personally, I normally just use the singleton and the observer pattern specifically. I use those pretty much exactly like they are designed, and then I use various other ones when I need them, even if I don't necessarily follow these strict patterns. So sometimes, for example, I have some kind of factory pattern. I have that where some objects are created only in a specific place, but I don't necessarily create a brand new specific factory class. Then, like I said, sometimes I use something similar to the command pattern, especially in management games to queue up all kinds of actions. And in Unity is all made about composition of various scripts, so technically it is the composite pattern. And I do normally try to compose my complex objects, usually by composing them based on interfaces, rather than just making one huge object with all kinds of logic. So I highly encourage you to research some design patterns in order to be familiar with them, but again, don't worry too much about memorizing them, especially not all of them. I certainly do not have memorized all of these patterns, only a handful of them. Then as you go through in your game dev or programming career, you'll learn which ones you will commonly use as you encounter similar problems.